Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Steve Leibowitz. When Prime Minister Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders state their goals for this war, they are simple and to the point: the defeat of Hamas, the return of the hostages, and the ability of Israeli residents from the Gaza border region to return safely to their homes. For the U.S., the goals of Israel's war and its aftermath are much broader. The remaking of Hamas, run by a reformed Palestinian Authority, with massive injections of aid from moderate Arab U.S. allies, and ultimately a demilitarized Palestinian state. And as its big prize, Saudi normalization with Israel, a vision of a new Middle East. Well, back here on Earth and in the real Middle East, I'm joined by our guests, Professor Gerald Steinberg from Bar-Ilan University and NGO Watch, and Colonel Reserve Miri Eisen, Director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Gerald, if I could, I'd like to start with you. Secretary of State Blinken, arriving tomorrow on his 5th visit since the start of the war, he has a list of short and long-term goals. Is one of those goals for Israel to defeat Hamas so that it can not return to rule Gaza?
The American government, both the President and Secretary of State Blinken, among others, also Secretary of Defense Austin, have repeatedly said that that's a goal. They have supported the Israeli position. And I think that that's something, and they've said that they're not holding a stopwatch, that Israel needs to do what it has to do. And I think that that is part of the framework. We may define the Israeli definition of what constitutes defeating of Hamas may be different than the American definition. That's open for discussion. But I think that the Secretary of State has a number of other issues on his agenda. The war, from what we can see, I don't like to use this term, but I think it's appropriate, is going relatively well, better than had been expected, I think, certainly by many, many critics, many observers, that Israel would be able to do this much damage to the Hamas military and terror infrastructure. What happens when we get to the Egyptian border and Rafah remains a question. That's also on the list. So I think bringing that war, the destruction of Hamas's military capability, terror capability to an end is clearly one of the agenda items, along with dealing with the Northern Front, with Hezbollah, with Iran, and many other issues.
Miri, let me turn to you. On the military side, it seems that major IDF maneuvers, with the possible exception of the Rafah area, as Gerald mentioned, are complete. Certainly there's a lot more to do in underground tunnels and ensuring that Hamas does not resurface. But what will be in Gaza when the war is over? Do we yet have a plan?
There's certainly a lot of people talking about that plan, both within the Israeli government system and so many people talking about it all around the world. So let's talk for a moment about what Israelis and Israelis in power are saying, and quite clearly. We won't allow Hamas to come back and to bring back that infrastructure, meaning for them to rule the street, for them to act as the responsible, as the sovereign. They've never been responsible. They've never acted as a sovereign. What they'll do is bring back their weaponry, their capabilities, their brutal methods that we've all seen. So Israel won't allow that. It's as if we feel that Israel is retreating, but we're not. We are in the northern Gaza Strip. We are in the central Gaza Strip. We are actively engaging. We don't have to do it at the high intensity that we did in those first 3 months, because we did those first 3 months of high intensity. We're now into, the end of the 4th month, going into the unbelievable, right? 4 months into the 5th month. But these military actions have changed the Hamas capabilities completely, and we're not upping and leaving. So that day after, for me right now, 2024 is the interim period. We, the Israeli forces, will be in the Gaza Strip. We're not leaving. We still have a lot of work to do on the ground systematically against the Hamas terror capabilities. Hand in hand with that, the question is who is going to take over the civilian day-to-day life. We're not going to let it be Hamas. The U.S. doesn't want it to be Hamas. I'd even go so far as to say that the EU and even the UN doesn't want it to be Hamas. But because we're the only ones that are actively there and actively care, that is going to be the question. What will be that civil presence that will do the day-to-day life for the millions of Gazans? How will they get back into some kind of life? And in that sense, it's going to be Israeli military presence around and somebody else running their civilian life.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
Gerald, along those same lines, the U.S., when it calls for a Palestinian state, they're careful to refer to a demilitarized Palestinian state down the road. Netanyahu is often referred to the same thing. Are Netanyahu and Biden potentially on the same page? Do they mean the same thing about a demilitarized Palestinian state?
I'm not sure anybody knows what they mean, what we mean by a demilitarized Palestinian entity, Palestinian state, demilitarized Gaza, pick one of those terms. Who's going to enforce that? What do we mean by demilitarized? We saw that over the last 20 years, roughly, certainly since Hamas took over Gaza violently in 2007, they used every available resource to build this huge, what is sometimes called the metros, underground system of hundreds of kilometers of concrete tunnels for one purpose, for terrorism. Who's going to enforce after there's a withdrawal by the Israeli forces, while after there is some sort of political framework in Gaza, perhaps somewhat international, perhaps the Palestinian Authority, all those things are open. Those are the questions I think need to be raised. I'm not sure that Secretary of State Blinken has any answers on that. The terminology is easy: demilitarized Palestinian state, some sort of a political framework for governing a Palestinian state that doesn't involve Israeli occupation. But how do you turn that into a realistic framework? That has to be discussed. I hope that there are some people in the Israeli government who have something more concrete. There's another element I just want to raise. The last few days, we've seen a very strong emphasis on ending the role of UNRWA, and I will expand that to say many of the so-called humanitarian frameworks that have been operating and allowed Hamas to operate in Gaza. UNRWA, all the 13 UN agencies, 13 UN agencies, not only UNRWA, operating in Gaza, and dozens of so-called NGOs funded largely by various governments. And they have allowed Hamas to build this infrastructure. They simply turned a blind eye, or in the case of UNRWA and others, they were very involved in the terror process. So that also has to be a primary part of examining the day after. The U.S. government, President Biden said they endorse UNRWA's continuing mission after the investigation. Well, I think that needs to be confronted, and they need to find alternatives now.
Miri, I want to come back to you. Prime Minister Netanyahu says that he knows how to say no to the U.S. when it comes to defending Israeli interests. Blinken is going to be here with some ideas that may seriously conflict. He invited Biden to Israel at the start of the war, and Blinken now 5 times attending our war cabinet meetings even. The U.S. has provided weapons and diplomatic support from day one. Are Washington and Jerusalem still fully coordinated on the same page?
They're certainly on the same page. That doesn't mean that they have to agree with everything. And I think that what we're always looking at is as if, how can Israel be the 51st of the federal government of the United States? We're not. We're an independent state. We live here in the Middle East. We border Syria, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Jordan, Egypt, and the Gaza Strip, and we're not the United States. And we have a very important strategic alliance that has to do with ethics, with ideas, with morals that I strongly believe in and still think that they're there. Having said all of that, that doesn't mean that the United States wants to act in every single action that Israel does in the same way. I don't think that the United States feels that existential noose that we have felt over the last 4 months, not just because of Hamas. If Gerald was talking before about how these 13 different UN agencies allowed all of the workers inside those agencies are the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip. Are we all going to agree that a portion of them are are Hamas supporters, not all of them, but a portion, and they're working inside the UN agencies. But we can't just focus right now on Hamas, because as soon as you ask aligned on the same page, Steve, we have to remind everybody, Israel has a northern border. Over the last few days, we've had more events on our northern border. We have daily sirens on our northern border inside the state of Israel, coming from Hezbollah, coming from another non-state hybrid terror organization inside a neighboring state, Lebanon, that is creating havoc, not just in Israel, but in the Middle East. So when Blinken comes, it's not just about what will happen to the absolutely tragic, poor people of the Gaza Strip. I can ask that question too. It's also about what will happen with Hezbollah in Lebanon. How will 150,000 Israelis go back to their homes up north and down south? And we're on the same page on the big questions. How you actually get there at the end, we're the ones on the border, we're the ones active inside. And if I could say something which is so not PC, but I'm going to say it anyways, if we could figure out a way to destroy Hamas capabilities and not kill any civilians, I'm there, I'm on board, I want that. We haven't figured out how to do it. I think that that's the main issue that is so painful for all of us. And I asked that same question about Hezbollah in Lebanon. Who's going to demilitarize Lebanon? Who's going to take away the intense, horrific military terror capabilities that Hezbollah has? All of these Blinken needs to address when he comes here.
Gerald, there's also something interesting about the timing of Blinken's visit. It comes only days, actually during U.S. striking out, hitting Iranian proxies in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria. They had some soldiers killed in Jordan. They're committed to protecting commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Their bases have now been attacked in the Middle East, and they're hitting back hard. Are they giving signs that they could actually strike into Iran in the coming period?
I believe it was the State Department spokesperson, maybe the White House, who said that they're not ruling out any options. But clearly they also talked about not wanting to have a wider war, that they want to send a message, all of those things. So I think the United States, while perhaps prepared to strike Iranian targets if necessary, it really is very serious about not wanting to have an escalating process. We're in an election year. We just talked about that, and it's a very tough election. And Mr. Biden needs to show a certain amount of muscle, but also for his own progressive Democratic wing, not go too far in terms of being seen as someone who brings America into a war that many people do not want to see. So walking that tightrope is extremely difficult for Biden, for Blinken. I think that, as Mary Eisen said, Hezbollah and the North have to be a major part of Mr. Blinken's conversations when he's here. Amos Hochstein is also here. I believe he's still here. He's a special American representative who's been trying, or envoy, who's been trying to work out some sort of a deal where the parameters are quite clear. Whether the Hezbollah will agree or not is not clear. And that is removal of the Hezbollah threat up number of kilometers away from the border so they cannot mount an October 7th-like attack against Israeli civilians in the northern towns. Something like 60,000, I believe, Israeli civilians from the north have been evacuated now since October 7th, or roughly that time. They can't go back until that Hezbollah threat is removed. And Minister of Defense Gallant has talked about being prepared. I think he talked about the Israeli Air Force, the noses of the airplanes are pointed in the direction of Hezbollah of Lebanon. I think that's very serious. It needs to be addressed.
Gerald, I just want to come back to the issue of what's happening here with the Blinken visit, or ahead of the Blinken visit. The Minister of Public Security, Ben-Gvir, said something which was not repeatable on this broadcast about President Biden. I think he's now apologized. As you said, we're in an election year. Shouldn't we be avoiding pissing off Washington right now?
You wanted me to take that, or Mary, do you want to take that?
No, I want
first?
Gerald first, and then I'm going to come back.
Go
ahead.
Okay. I'll start. I'm gonna let Gerald off the hook on that one, okay? Because I have, in that sense, I want to say the honor to have been the Israeli government spokesperson during a vastly different cabinet. But I do want to say that every Israeli cabinet has all sorts of people in it. And I'm allowed for a moment to completely disagree with some of the ministers in the different parties that are part of the cabinet, but I live in a democracy and they're allowed to say horrific things and hopefully afterwards apologize. But part of that, Steve, in that sense, is I'm pushing back in the sense that so he said something that was horrible. I have stood up and defended the government of the state of Israel, where you've had ministers saying horrible things. It's not government policy. It's not what the cabinet is choosing to do. It is his provocative way of getting more young voters. It's not for the U.S. consumption. I don't think that he's ever, I don't know, now I'm going to go on in, I don't know if he's ever been to the United States. He has no interest. He's a very local type of politician. And in that sense, I don't like our heightening what he says. I'm going to poo-poo it, put it on the side, and I think that we need to deal with people like Ben-Gvir locally inside Israel by not giving them the platform for the horrific things that they say. I could say that about a lot of politics, not just inside Israel right now. It is a year inside the United States where things like that are going to be highlighted. If every single time we show the state of Israel through the eyes of Ben-Gvir, Steve, we're doing a disservice to us in Israel. He does not represent the majority of Israelis. His voice is not the majority of Israelis, and politics can be ugly. So that's what I wanted to say on that subject.
I want to throw out a question.
You said it much better than I would have, but I agree with every word.
I want to throw out a question to both of you, each of you. Whoever wants to answer first can. We're now in February, 124 days into the war in Gaza. The residents of the South and the North seem no closer to returning to their homes today than they were on October 8th. We were all surprised on October 7th. Are you guys surprised by our condition on February 6th?
Steve, I'll take this one. Steve, I think, so I wouldn't say surprised. I had a lot of, I guess the term is faith, there's got to be a better term, confidence in the ability of the Israeli public, including we're a citizens' army. We all have family that have been in Gaza, in and out, in other parts of the country, also up north. And they fought extremely, extremely professionally to make sure that Israeli citizens can be safe. What happened on October 7th was impossible to understand, to comprehend tragedy. It'll take us many years. But fighting back, destroying the forces that attacked us, and what's going on a day-to-day basis in Gaza is a source of great pride. Again, I'm not saying surprise, but I think many of the commentators of the first few days, the first few weeks after the war, American analysts, journalist analysts, some Israeli analysts said Israel will never be able to reach the goal of destroying the Hamas military capability. They won't be able to destroy the underground tunnel network. Well, I think it's going as much better than it could have been expected at the time. So it's not a matter of surprise. I think we're getting close to the stage where the southern part of Israel can start to be rebuilt and protected, so this will never happen again. And that's extremely important. This will not happen again. The set of circumstances that led to October 7th is not going to happen again because the Israeli public has learned a great lesson from this. And also the Israeli military intelligence. So the North is going to be harder, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Miri, where do you think we're at? Yeah.
So first of all, I really do feel, and I don't like being, the one who prophetesizes. On October 8th and ever since, I've said this is a long war. And when I said long war, I didn't mean a week or a month or even 2 months. I meant this is a war that's going to take a long time because we all understand what there is inside, underneath the Gaza Strip, 2.2 million above ground, the subterranean system below ground, and we're going to dismantle it systematically and slowly. Why not quickly? Because when you do it quickly, you kill 2 million people. And that's what we're not doing. We're doing it systematically, slowly, telling people to move away from the areas that are in high friction. And we've done that for the last 4 months. When I say, am I not surprised? Steve, I'm not surprised by what's happening in Israel. I think that we're an amazing country that has amazing backbone. If I can say that I'm surprised by one thing, it has been how much of a gap has grown between the way we perceive this war in Israel now, February, 124 days into it, and the way the rest of the world is framing it. not as this war should have been over. I'm like, you have a better way to destroy Hamas? No problem, but we're not going to end this war until Hamas's capabilities are destroyed. You want the people to move back up north? Fine. Tell them to move back north when Hezbollah with the Radwan horrific terror forces are on the other side of the border. And I'm surprised at the growing gap. I'm surprised at the lack of any place, anywhere, except for hardcore Israel supporters who are willing to look at it from our perspective, not even in agreeing, but in willing to be open to that. That has surprised me. It hurts. It's hurting me throughout the way because I do so much international media and I see the growing gap. There was a gap from the beginning on how we perceive wars when you're here or the outside. And there are two sides to this war, but that's the whole thing. There's more than two sides. Nobody's talking about Hezbollah in Lebanon. Barely anybody is talking about the Shiite forces as if that's Israel's problem, that we're the ones bringing them in and making these Hezbollah forces in Syria and in Iraq and the Yemenite forces fire and make war around. This is not just about us. And in that sense, I'm surprised by the growing gap and I'm worried by it because this war is still going to be long. And the more everybody looks at it as being Israel's doing, to me, that's a real challenge.
Winning the war on the ground and losing it in world public opinion, perhaps. Gerald, something that's on everyone's mind in Israel. The hostage agreement remains evasive. The release of those hostages, who knows when it can finally happen. Do you expect that potentially the Blinken visit and the continuing work of the mediators will bring an agreement finally that will allow Israel to eventually finish the war?
I just want to make a quick comment before I answer that very complicated question on what Miri said. I'm more optimistic, maybe artificially, than Miri is about the way the rest of the world, what we call the rest of the world, the chattering classes view what's going on here and our continued effort to destroy the Hamas capability and the North. I do see signs of support, maybe not more than I expected. I think most of the mass media is hopeless and have absolutely no understanding of what's going on in the substance. But I do see voices in various organizations, institutions, academic institutions, not the ones that are in the sociology or protesting the terrible things that Israel is allegedly doing to the Palestinians, but people who study security and war seriously. And some of the analyses that they've had very much reinforce the Israeli impression, my impression, of a very professional job being done by the IDF that's going to set the standard. Much more, if I don't like to boast we're the most moral army in the world or the most professional army, I don't like those terminology. But certainly what we're doing now in Gaza, what we, the IDF, our society as a whole is doing in Gaza is a textbook case that's going to be studied for many years in American military academies. If it happens in Europe, the Europeans start to take warfare seriously and security seriously also there and other places in the world. And that's very important. As
Gerald,
far as the hostages and Blinken.
Sorry, Raz is talking in my ear and our producer and telling me that we are out of time for tonight. It really went by quickly. I love having both of you as guests. It really was a pleasure for me. And thank you to our guests, Colonel Miri Eisen, Professor Gerald Steinberg. And for more of the latest updates from Israel, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv. Thanks for watching. Let's win the war and bring them home.